Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a book recommendation video. This is the book recommendation tag. I've seen a couple people do this on here, and so I pulled questions from those videos, and I have a lovely stack of books to recommend you here. If you aren't subscribed, make sure you subscribe down below. I post every single week. I've been posting a lot of book videos recently, but next week's video is going to be a little bit different, so stay tuned for that. Make sure you're subscribed. You can follow me on all my social media down below, and without further ado, let's get into the video. Starting off strong, the first question is a book that you tell everyone is your favorite. And this book is Tuesdays with Maury. This copy is from my 10th grade English class. This book holds such a special place in my heart. We did this in my English class in 10th grade, and my English teacher that year is one of the best English teachers I've ever had. And this is just such a beautiful book, but the way he taught it was so fantastic. It just like hit even deeper than it probably would have if I had read it by myself. And this copy I've read a few times. It has underlining in it and a signature from Mitch Albom himself, because I met him at the National Book Festival a couple years ago. If you're not familiar with this book, it's about a man named Maury who was Mitch Albom's professor in college, and he reconnects with him after many years. And when he reconnects with Maury, Maury has been diagnosed with ALS and he's at the end of his life. And so they spend every Tuesday together having conversations about life, about dying, about grief, and things like that. And you really connect to both Mitch Albom's experience doing this and Maury you fall in love with. I would say this is an absolute must-read for anyone, especially if you're dealing with grief or loss of a family member, friend, or something like that. This definitely sheds an interesting light on life and death and the process of it all. So this is by far my favorite book, and this book specifically is one of my like would grab in a fire books in my collection. So as you can tell, I love this book so much. You must read this one. The next prompt is a book you read the fastest, and the one I chose for this prompt is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, I think. His third book just came out a few weeks ago, and I'm so excited to read it. He writes mysteries in such an entrancing way. And I think it's because his chapters are like only a few pages long. So when you read a chapter, you're like, well, I need to know what happens next. It's only a few more pages. And then by the time you know it, you're done reading the book. I read this in less than a day, basically in 2 sittings. From what I remember, there is a therapist talking to this patient that's been in this like inpatient clinic for like a year, and he hasn't said any words at all, and the therapist is trying to figure out what happened and why he's gone mute, and you're getting like little itsy bitsy crumbs the whole way through until the big plot twist at the end, which I absolutely did not see coming. It's a pretty approachable mystery. I didn't find it too like spooky, so I definitely would recommend this if you're looking for a fun quick mystery read. But yeah, definitely one of the fastest reads ever. The next prompt is a book that deserves more hype. So I have 2 books for this. The first one is Remarkably Bright Creatures. This is a book about a woman who her retirement job is working at an aquarium, and her son, I think, disappeared years in the past, and she's still not really sure what happened, and this octopus at the aquarium is helping her solve the mystery. And it's not fantasy, it's like told in a way that makes it seem like it could happen in real life. And if I can remember correctly, the octopus had chapters, like the octopus had a monologue, but it was so sweet and so beautiful, and I don't see enough people talking about it, and I loved that book. The other one that I don't see too many people talking about, which is like one of the most perfect books I've ever read, is The Overstory by Richard Powers. This book is a story told through multiple characters. The first section is sort of short stories of these different characters, and then the second half is all of their stories sort of like intertwining together, and it's about the environment and trees, and the whole point of the story is these people's lives, but throughout the story you get woven through like the observations of nature and how nature is sort of perceiving their stories. It's just so smart, so well done, so beautifully written, and more people should definitely read this. It was one of my favorite books I read last year. The next prompt is a book you have reread the most, and I have Charlotte's Web. This is another one of my would grab in a fire books. This is the first chapter book I ever read when I was 6, I think. And this is actually that exact copy. As you can tell, it is very loved. This was actually a book that my grandma had in her library when she was a teacher many years ago, so this is a very special book to me as well. If you don't know what Charlotte's Web is about, you have to read it. This is like an absolute children's lit classic. This book, and the first chapter especially, is just like written into my brain. I love this book so much. It's such a sweet story of friendship and animals, and I'm really excited to reread this book this year because it just brings me such comfort. So yes, this is definitely the book that I've read the most. The next prompt is a book from a genre you don't typically read, and I chose In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And the reason I chose this book is not because I don't typically read memoirs or biographies, because I do read those, but the way that this is written is so unique that, to be honest, I don't really think it has a genre that it fits into. Each chapter is told sort of in a different literary style, and it's this sort of intense depiction of this queer relationship sort of gone bad. She talks a lot about the abuse that happened and sort of how she picks up the pieces and moves on from it, and it was really moving, really engrossing. Like, I really was into the story as I was reading it. It's definitely intense, so look up trigger warnings before you read it, but I think it was done so well. She's such a fantastic author, and she writes really funky books, so I would definitely recommend this if you're looking for a unique memoir to read. The next prompt is a book that deserves all the hype it gets, and I have Daisy Jones and the Sixth by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It is, if you haven't heard of it, a book about a band from the 70s. It's a fiction book, but it's kind of told in a way that makes it seem real. And the book is written in a transcript, sort of as if it was like a documentary. And I know some people have qualms with that, but I loved it. And I reread this book last year before the show came out, and I thought I wasn't gonna like it as much as the first time I read it, and I loved it just as much. So this is definitely on my list to reread eventually, just because I loved the way it felt when I was reading it. Taylor Jenkins Reid writes such like juicy stories that are, you just like eat them up. So this is definitely a really popular book that I really loved and rated 5 stars both times I read it. And I would definitely recommend. At the show I didn't finish. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. And I definitely will finish it eventually. But the book is really good, and it's a really unique way of storytelling, I thought. The next question is a book you recommend when asked to give a recommendation, and this one's a little bit tricky because usually depending on who asks me for a recommendation, I like to tailor the recommendation to that, because obviously people read a lot of different things and people like different things. But a book that I read last year that I find myself recommending a lot recently is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is a literary fiction story about a woman who steals her friend's manuscript after her friend dies. That happens in like the first 10 pages, and fixes it up and passes it off as her own. And she is white and her friend was Asian, and the book was like an Asian historical fiction book that this woman, a white woman, was taking on as her own. She changes her name to sound more Asian. It's a crazy story because it's told in first person, and the whole time she's rationalizing to the reader that whatever she did was not that bad, and she's not a bad person, and it's okay what she did, and obviously it's not okay what she did, and the whole time you're reading it, you're like, I know she's a bad person, but she's making me believe that she isn't. So it was such a quick read, and I just think it was so genius. So R.F. Kuang is one of the most talented authors ever, and this one is a pretty short one, and I read it in basically a day. So would definitely recommend that if you're looking for something fast-paced and something a little bit different for lit fic. The next question is a book that has your favorite characters, and that one is easily Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I love this book, and I waited way too long to read it. I had friends recommending it to me for years before I finally picked it up. There's a trilogy, the Shadow and Bone trilogy, that comes before the Six of Crows duology, but you don't have to read it at all. And you could honestly just read Six of Crows and not read any of the other books in that universe, because it's so well done. It follows 6 characters that are on like a heist mission, and then there's this whole like magical world element where they have different powers and stuff. So that's why reading Shadow and Bone first can help, because it gets you into the world, but you don't need it to read Six of Crows. This book is so fun. The characters are fantastic, and you fall in love with all of their different personalities because they each get different chapters. You get all of their different perspectives, and I love this book. The next one is a book that is set in a place you wish you could live in, and I have here The House in the Cerulean Sea. I read this book a couple summers ago and really enjoyed it, but I didn't rate it a 5-star, but since then I continue to think about it, and I would love to reread it because the second book is coming out at the end of this year, which I didn't know he was going to write another book to it. I'm so excited. Basically, it's about a man who works at this Ministry of Magic, something like that, where he's like keeping track of people who are magical, and he gets this job to go to this house in the Cerulean Sea, to this island where they put all the kids that are like the most dangerous magically, like the devil is there as a child. So he's there to make sure everything's okay, what's going on there. The Ministry of Magic keeps having problems with the people they send there. So he goes there, and then it becomes this beautiful story of like found family and friendship and love, and it reads like an adult Pixar novel, and this is just like such a perfect book. I loved it so much. And just the general vibe is why I would want to go to that world, because it just feels like a Pixar novel. Like, why wouldn't you want to go to like into a Pixar movie? So anyway, this is definitely a must read. I loved this book. The next question is a book that you thought you would hate but ended up loving, and this book is None of This Is True. I just read this a couple weeks ago, and I was a little bit wary of it because I'd heard some mixed reviews. It was really popular last year, and sometimes with popular mysteries and sometimes even other popular books, they just fall flat for me. I was very pleasantly surprised. I sat and read the last 200 pages right here in my bed without moving because I just had to know what happened next. It was so intense. And I don't want to tell too much because it's definitely a book that is better off going in without knowing anything, but basically it's about these 2 women who share a birthday. One of them has a podcast, and the other one wants to be on her podcast to tell her life story because she's about to do something big. And the whole time, like, you know something bad has happened. They kind of give that away at the beginning of the book, but you don't know who did it or really what happened, and you get these crumbs throughout the book. I think that Lisa Jewell did a great job of sort of leaving you a trail to get to the end. And I wouldn't say it was like the craziest plot twist, but the journey there was fantastic. So I really loved that book. Next prompt is a book that made you cry, and this book, The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. This is another like modern classic, I would say. If you haven't read this, you absolutely must. I definitely need to put this on my list to reread. It's a story about World War II and Nazi Germany, and the coolest thing about the story is it's told from the perspective of death. And there's just like so many moments in this book that are so emotional. When I watched the movie, I was literally crying for half of the movie, and there are parts of this book that if I flip open to, I just like tears well in my eyes because it's so emotional, but it's so well done that it evokes that much emotion in you, you know? Like, it's, I had an English teacher once that always used to say, all good books are sad books. This book is super smart, definitely a modern classic, and definitely worth reading. Last book is a book you wish you could read for the first time, and honestly, I have a long list of these books because nothing is the same as reading a book for the first time, but this book, I've been thinking about it since I read it like almost 2 years ago now. And that book is Ella Minnow P by Mark Dunn. This is such a genius book. Basically, the concept of it is the characters live on this island that's named after the person who wrote the sentence, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," which, if you don't know, is a sentence that has every single letter in the English alphabet. And in their city hall, they have it up on the ceiling, and one day one of the letters drops off, and they're like, oh my god, it's a sign from that guy, what are we gonna do? Since the letter fell off, they decide to outlaw that letter in the town so that anybody who uses that letter could be kicked off the island. They basically get like 3 strikes. The twist is, this book is written in letters, like dear from letters, not like word letters. That always gets confusing when I explain this book. So as the book goes on, the letters that fall off the ceiling in the city hall that they're not allowed to use anymore are taken out of the letters that people are writing to each other in the book because it's illegal to use those letters. It's so smart. It's such a sweet book. I love books told in letters or like unique ways of writing like that. And I just so enjoyed the experience of reading it the first time. Now that I sort of know the story and what happens, it's not as exciting to read it again, but I definitely will reread this. But this is a super fun book if you're looking for something short, especially if you're going on a little vacation. I would say this is a perfect vacation read. And I would absolutely recommend it. Thank you for watching all the way till the end. If you've made it this far, you absolutely should subscribe and comment down below a book you recommend for me. I'm always looking for new book recommendations. And make sure you follow me on all my social media, and I will see you guys next week. Bye, friends!